Have you ever felt like something inside you is holding you back, even when everything seems to be in your favor? As if a part of you sabotages your own success without explanation? Self-sabotage is real and silent. In this video we'll expose how it works, and how to overcome it for good. 1. Recognize the signs of self-sabotage. You set goals, get filled with motivation, and even visualize your success. But when it's time to act, something blocks you. An invisible force seems to pull you back, and then comes procrastination, excuses, discouragement. Simple tasks feel heavy and obvious decisions become confusing. Sometimes the body reacts too, sudden fatigue, headaches, or even illness. All of this appears without an apparent reason, sabotaging what, deep down, you want to achieve. But don't be fooled. This isn't bad luck or weakness, it's your own mind trying to protect something you don't yet understand. These self-sabotaging behaviors aren't random. They're repetitive patterns that emerge whenever you get close to something important. It might be the moment to start a new project, accept a promotion, commit to someone, or change your lifestyle. The conscious mind says go, but another, deeper part screams stop. And it's in this inner conflict that progress stagnates. You feel divided, as if one part of you is against the other. Identifying this internal conflict is the first step to breaking the cycle. Without this recognition, any attempt at change will be sabotaged before it even begins. Self-sabotage is, in practice, a form of defense just poorly directed. Its origin lies in unconscious layers of the psyche that operate beyond reason's reach. And that's why the signs are so confusing. The person wants something but acts against it. They seek happiness but get involved in painful situations. They want to grow but unconsciously create obstacles. Understanding that these blockages have a deeper origin, and that they don't define who you are, opens space for a new perspective. One that's more honest, more human, and above all, more conscious. 2. Understand the unconscious origin of your blockages. The human mind isn't a single block. It's a complex system with layers that often operate in opposite directions. That's why, even with a clear decision, you might feel a resistance you can't explain. Carl Jung was one of the first to explore this dynamic in depth. He understood that the unconscious plays an active role in our lives, and that, many times, it makes decisions for us without our awareness. Hidden motivations, old traumas, and unresolved experiences become living forces within us, shaping choices and sabotaging intentions. These unconscious blockages act like a primitive protection system. They aim to avoid pain, rejection, or failure, even if that means steering us away from what we desire. The unconscious mind doesn't think in terms of fulfillment. It thinks in terms of emotional survival. So if a goal triggers painful memories, old fears, or feelings of inadequacy, the unconscious will stop your progress without asking permission. It'll do this by sabotaging your actions, creating sudden fatigue, planting doubts, or making you lose focus. The worst part is that all of this happens without you realizing what's behind it. That's why trying to overcome self-sabotage with willpower alone is useless. You can fight, persist, blame yourself. But until you understand the true source of the blockage, the resistance will remain. The solution begins with a new kind of listening, internal listening. Observe your impulses, automatic reactions, and what throws you off track. Ask yourself honestly, what part of me is afraid of this? Only then can you break out of repetition mode and enter the path of transformation. Because it's not just about going further, it's about understanding who inside you is pulling the brake. 3. Understand Jung's shadow concept. Carl Jung believed that every human being carries within them an invisible, hidden, and powerful part. The shadow. This shadow is not a monster or inner villain, but everything you reject or can't accept in yourself. Fears, impulses, desires, personality traits. Everything that was condemned, repressed, or silenced by family, society, or yourself ends up locked in this psychological basement. The problem is, hiding these parts doesn't eliminate them. You just push them to a place where they can act without you noticing. The shadow works like a reservoir of unintegrated psychic fragments. Inside it may lie both negative traits like anger or envy, and repressed vital forces like creativity, boldness, and desire. What defines the shadow isn't the content, but the fact that it's hidden. And the more you ignore this part, the more power it gains. The shadow starts making decisions for you silently. It doesn't speak out loud but influences your thoughts, choices, and actions. And often, it does so by sabotaging exactly what you want. Understanding the shadow concept opens a door to true self-knowledge. It's not about fighting it but recognizing it as part of who you are. The shadow is yours, it belongs to you, and it holds truths that your conscious mind doesn't want to see. Growth begins when you have the courage to face it without fear, moralism, or judgment. What's in there isn't dirty, it's human. And ignoring it is living divided. Jung shows us that integrating the shadow is an essential step to stop being a hostage to unconscious impulses and start living with more clarity and inner freedom. 4. Stop repressing your undesired aspects from an early age. We're taught that certain emotions and behaviors are unacceptable. We're taught not to show anger, not to feel envy, not to show weakness. So what do? We repress. We push it all to a hidden place and pretend it doesn't exist. But what's repressed doesn't disappear, it just changes form. It infiltrates the mind's backstage and begins to influence your life without you realizing it. That's how slips, inner saboteurs, and compulsive behaviors emerge. All of these are voices of what was rejected. Repression is like sweeping garbage under the rug hoping it'll evaporate. But over time, it rots, leaks, and starts contaminating the environment. In other words, the more you try to deny certain parts of yourself, the more dangerous they become. Not because they're bad, but because they're acting in the dark. When you repress a trait, you also lose control over it. It ceases to be a conscious choice and becomes an automatic force. That's when it turns into sabotage. Anger explodes, fear paralyzes, guilt blocks, all out of your control. Overcoming self-sabotage requires courage to stop hiding who you are. It means looking inward and saying, yes, this part is also mine. It's not about accepting mistakes as excuses, but understanding the root of the behavior. We can only transform what we have the courage to see. Stopping repression is the start of reintegration. It's the moment you stop dividing yourself and begin to come together, whole. And a whole being has much more strength, clarity, and decision-making power than a fragmented one. Change begins with acceptance, not rejection. 5. Identify your shadow aspects inside your mind. There's not just one voice, there are several. And some of these voices are pieces of you that were left behind, rejected, or forgotten. Jung called these parts shadow aspects or mini-personalities. They are fragments of the psyche that carry emotions, traumas, desires, and fears you didn't want to face. But what few people realize is that these parts are still alive. They have opinions, they have agendas, and often they're in control even if you don't notice. These shadow aspects act like little internal selves, each with its own story and motivation. One might be the rebellious teenager who learned not to trust anyone. Another might be the child who felt ashamed to express themselves. Each fragment carries its own pain and logic, and all of them are part of you. The problem is, because they're separated from your consciousness, they act like autonomous entities. And it's these voices that create subtle sabotages, like the sudden urge to give up, the feeling of not deserving something, or the irrational fear of success. Identifying these fragments requires internal listening and sincere self-observation. You need to start noticing when certain reactions don't match your rational self. When a strange impulse arises, a sudden mood swing, or a behavior that seems to come out of nowhere, it's probably a shadow aspect trying to surface. The key here isn't to fight these parts, but to recognize them. Ask yourself, what part of me is reacting like this? What does it want? What is it afraid of? The more you know these little selves, the more ability you have to come together as a whole. 6. Observe the conflicts between ego and shadow. Have you ever really wanted something, but did everything the opposite? Ever committed to a plan and destroyed it just before it worked? These are classic signs of a conflict between the ego, the conscious part that says, I want, and the shadow, the unconscious part that says, it's not safe. While the ego plans, organizes, and dreams, the shadow silently watches and evaluates. Will this protect us or hurt us? If the unconscious answer is, this is emotionally risky, it will act. And it will act against you even if it seems absurd. These internal conflicts generate a silent but intense battle. The ego wants success, but the shadow fears exposure. The ego wants freedom, but the shadow fears abandonment. The ego wants independence, but the shadow desires closeness. These tensions create a sense of paralysis or inexplicable sabotage. And until there's an internal agreement between these parts, you'll remain stuck in the cycle of advance and retreat. The key isn't to force the ego to win, but to understand what the shadow is trying to protect. Observing these conflicts is an act of psychic maturity. It's leaving the illusion that there's only one will inside you and starting to negotiate with your internal complexity. Ask yourself, what part of me doesn't want this to happen? Why? This investigation reveals deep fears, old wounds, and unmet needs. When you listen with empathy to what the shadow is trying to say, it starts to cooperate instead of sabotage. And that's the beginning of a true internal reconciliation, where the I want and the I fear can walk together. 7. Accept your hidden needs. Oftentimes, What we call self-sabotage is actually a muffled cry for something that's been ignored for too long. Behind every blockage lies a legitimate need, but one that's been forgotten, denied, or repressed. Maybe it's the desire to be loved, to belong, to rest, to be free, to be seen. These needs don't just disappear because you decided to take another path. On the contrary, the more you ignore them, the harder they fight for space. And if they're not heard, they'll find creative and destructive ways to express themselves. Accepting your hidden needs is not a sign of weakness, but of emotional intelligence. Imagine someone chasing total independence but, deep down, carrying a deep need for connection. As long as that need is rejected, it will work behind the scenes to sabotage any attempt at isolation. The result is a cycle of confusion where conscious goals are never fulfilled. But when that need is acknowledged, it can be included in the equation. The path stops being a battlefield and becomes an integrated journey. This process of acceptance takes courage. Courage to admit you're not as invulnerable as you'd like. That there are parts of you that still feel fear, longing, anger, or neediness. And that's okay. These emotions are not enemies, they're signals. Denying them only strengthens the inner conflict. Accepting them, on the other hand, opens up the possibility to make more conscious choices that honor both your goals and your deeper truths. And that's when self-sabotage loses power, when you stop running from yourself and start, finally, embracing yourself fully. 8. Illuminate what's hidden. The shadow operates in the dark. Its power comes precisely from being hidden, out of consciousness's reach. That's why the most revolutionary act you can do for yourself is to shed light on what's hidden. This doesn't mean controlling everything, but clearly seeing what was previously ignored. When you bring a part of yourself into the light that used to operate in the shadows, it stops silently manipulating you. It loses the power to sabotage from behind the scenes, and you gain the chance to choose more truthfully. Illuminating the unconscious is a process that requires attention, honesty, and consistency. It's not enough to meditate once or journal occasionally. You must observe patterns, automatic reactions, internal phrases that repeat. You must sincerely ask yourself, what am I avoiding feeling? Where does this impulse come from? What part of me feels threatened by this change? Every answered question is a piece of the shadow becoming conscious. And the more you know your hidden motivations, the freer you become to act with real autonomy. The light you cast on yourself isn't judgment, it's awareness. And awareness doesn't condemn, it understands. When you understand the origin of a self-sabotaging behavior, it loses its mystery. And when there's no more mystery, there's no more prison. Illuminating the hidden is like opening a door inward. Fear diminishes, resistance weakens, and self-trust begins to grow. Because you stop walking in the dark and start walking with clarity, even if uncertainties remain. 9. Redefine your goals in an inclusive way. One of the most common mistakes on the path of self-awareness is setting goals that ignore important parts of who you are. The ego defines the goal: success, independence, discipline. But if those goals don't take into account your emotions, vulnerabilities, and internal needs, they become traps. You strive, but something inside resists. Not out of laziness or lack of focus, but because the plan ignores an essential part of you. And anything that's ignored tends to rebel, especially when it feels like it won't have a place anymore. So redefining your goals doesn't mean giving up on them, it means making them more human. Instead of pursuing an idealized version of yourself, pursue an integrated one. If your plan involves professional success, ask, how can I include rest, leisure, and connection in that? If your dream is independence, ask, how can I maintain healthy emotional bonds along the way? When your goals embrace all parts of you, including the ones that fear, feel, and doubt, they become sustainable. And they stop being a source of self-sabotage. This shift in perspective completely transforms your journey. You move from rigidity to fluidity. You stop forcing yourself into molds and start creating a path that actually makes sense. A path that respects your timing, your truth, and your complexity. This doesn't mean going slower, it means going with more awareness. Inclusive goals aren't smaller goals. They are more real, more effective, and more aligned with who you truly are. And that's why they work. 10. Practice integration and ongoing self-knowledge. Overcoming self-sabotage is not a one-time achievement, it's a continuous practice. It's like cleaning a mirror. You do it once, but over time it fogs up again. Likewise, the mind accumulates new tensions, new traumas, new inner voices. That's why integration must become a habit. A constant process of observing, listening, embracing, and adjusting. There is no finish line, there is a path of returning to yourself that is walked day by day, with patience, attention, and commitment. This practice starts with small rituals of inner listening. It can be a moment of silence before making decisions, a journal where you name your fears and desires, an honest conversation with yourself in the face of a crisis. Integration doesn't require perfection, just presence. It asks that you be willing to stop running from yourself. And most importantly, that you recognize that all parts of your psyche, even the most contradictory ones, have something to say, something to teach, something to transform. In the end, self-awareness is the most powerful antidote to self-sabotage. Because the more you know yourself, the less you betray yourself. The more you integrate, the less you divide. And the more conscious you become, the freer you are to choose, with truth, with intention, with peace. The shadow no longer needs to fight for control because now it has a place. And when all parts of you walk in the same direction, life stops being an internal war and becomes a conscious construction. True freedom begins when you stop fighting against yourself and start understanding yourself. Overcoming self-sabotage is not about strength, it's about awareness. If this content made sense to you, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Together, let's move toward a clearer mind and a more whole life.